Hey guys, Henry here, and today we're going to be talking about the Netflix film The Way Back, breaking down and explaining the plot of the film, and sharing my thoughts. The Way Back is a film directed by Gavin O'Connor, and it follows Jack Cunningham, an alcoholic that's given a gig coaching the basketball team of his old high school. This movie had a really gritty performance by Ben Affleck and was a little bit less about basketball than I initially thought. I always love a good basketball movie, even if the movie itself isn't that good, like Coach Carter or White Men Can't Jump. I always really find the basketball aspects so enjoyable. So this film, when I saw the trailer and after I watched the movie, it wasn't quite what I expected. It was a lot less about the game of basketball, and in fact was much deeper, and it tackled themes of addiction and grief, with basketball really just being a sideline character. I did definitely enjoy the film a lot. Although it wasn't groundbreaking by any means, it had a really solid performance and it was pretty engaging. So I must say it was a very solid film and very well worth a watch. As I will be recapping and talking through plot points of The Way Back, you have been warned there will be spoilers ahead. So, Ben Affleck plays Jack Cunningham. Like I said before, he's a former high school basketball star who at the time had a full scholarship to play college basketball and was full of potential. But fast forward to now and he's a middle-aged construction worker who continues to chug alcohol as long as he's awake. He drinks on the down low at work and even while driving, and then when he gets home, he just has a party on his own. He's got a little system where he chucks a can from the fridge into the freezer every time he drinks one, so that when he wants another, there's always going to be one nice and cold, ready to go. He drinks in the shower and of course his favorite local bar, which he normally goes to and gets absolutely tanked and needs his mates to drag him back home after he gets wrecked. Jack goes to a Thanksgiving dinner with his family, his sister's there with her family, and his mother's there. And we see Jack interact lovingly with his nephew and niece, and his sister, Beth, tells him that Angela, Jack's wife, has been concerned about him lately. We find out that Angela and Jack have been separated for a while, and this is presumably the reason for him spiraling, leading him to shut himself off from the world and numb himself with alcohol. The next day, Jack gets a call from the priest/principal in charge of his former high school, Bishop Hayes, who asks him to come back to the school and step in as the head coach of the basketball team. The high school had not even made the playoffs since Jack had left school, so there was a lot of work to be done. Jack initially wants to turn down the offer, not really wanting to get involved in any extracurricular activities, but the priest tells him to sleep on it. So typical Jack, he goes home and smashes a couple more beers just to clear his mind. The next day, surprisingly, Jack relents and actually agrees to take the job. It's not really clear what changes his mind because from what we see, he's very resistant. But regardless, at the first practice, Jack meets the assistant coach and algebra teacher, Dan, and the other players on the team. As I said earlier, Bishop Hayes have not had a good basketball team in a while, and this current iteration of the team only has 6 varsity players, getting 4 call-ups just to run a practice. We don't really get to know the players too well, but we meet Brandon. He's the most talented player on the team, and he definitely works the hardest and is in the gym late. He's extremely soft-spoken and lacks real confidence. And we also see another character in Marcus, the team center at only 6'4", who has a terrible attitude. And I mean, he's a center that jacks up threes all of practice, and he just keeps airballing, and he seems like he's proud of it. Who wouldn't hate to play on this guy's team? In Jack's first game as a coach, they verse a team called Memorial, a much larger school with a much more talented team. During the game, Jack benches Marcus because he doesn't think Marcus is playing tough enough, and he yells some inspiring words to get the guys to get pumped up and go out there and try their hardest. But despite all the yelling, they still get blown out. We then go down a bit of the classic ragtag high school basketball team, galvanized behind their coach to become more than the sum of their parts, with Jack implementing a full court press defense and focusing on conditioning and endurance to make up for the team's lack of size and talent. It's a pretty typical Coach Carter move if you ask me, or a more modern reference, a LeVar Ball move, getting them to focus on purely endurance and just pressing and running the ball. The team obviously does not enjoy the stricter coaching regime that Jack is implementing, some of them getting frustrated, but as they rack up the wins, they learn to respect and appreciate him. And amongst all this, we get Jack kicking Marcus off the team, and then letting Marcus back on the team. And we see Jack push Brandon to be a vocal leader and eventually the captain of the team, and putting the ball in his hands in late game situations. After one game, he sees Brandon walking home alone, and he offers to give him a lift. And while in the car, Jack asks Brandon why his father doesn't come to any of the games. and Brandon explains that his mother had passed away and that his father has to take care of his younger brothers at home. Under Jack's leadership, the team keeps racking up the wins, and as the team succeeds, Jack's drinking slows down, no longer going to his local bar every night, and he spends more time with his family and friends. It's pretty interesting because the film doesn't really go into detail as to how hard it was for him to sort of go off the alcohol. He sort of just does it naturally, just stops going to the bar. He's more happy, he's enjoying his time with his family, but it doesn't really go into the detail of how hard it was for him to actually wean himself off that alcohol. Anyway, he and Angela attend a birthday party for David, the son of their friend Miguel, and we learn that Jack and Angela actually had a son of their own, Michael, who had passed away. While dropping Angela back home, and early in the film, Jack having been told by Angela that she was seeing someone new, Jack throws this back in her face, claiming that she was not taking the death of their son as hard as he was, and they part on a sour note. We go back to the basketball team, and they're only one win away from making the playoffs, but they blow an opportunity to secure their spot in the second last game against a really weak squad. They give up a big fourth quarter lead, and towards the end of the game, Jack is ejected for going ballistic and protesting a call, while only down one, causing him to get ejected and allowing the other team to shoot technical free throws and seal the game. Now Bishop Hayes have to win their final game against Memorial to get into the playoffs. Memorial is now the best team in the state, holding the best record. On the drive home, Brandon asks Jack about his scholarship to the University of Kansas, and Jack opens up about how his father had never really cared for him until he found out that Jack was actually good at basketball, and only then he began to pay attention to him. And in a way, Jack felt like he was getting back at his father by never playing basketball again after high school and turning down the scholarship. So we now are getting a bigger picture of Jack's history and the reason for his self-destructive nature. Jack goes to visit Brandon's father ahead of the final game, and he tells him that Brandon has generated a bit of buzz from college recruiters, but Brandon's father's not interested and he doesn't really care. He said that he himself went to play college basketball, but yet he was still stuck working a rough job on the docks in the end. And he was actively discouraging Brandon from banking on basketball as a means of creating a better life for himself. At the final game against Memorial play really well and are in control for most of the game. But after some yelling and some inspiring quotes from Jack, the team mounts a comeback. Now only down one with one possession left, Jack calls a timeout and, expecting Memorial to double team Brandon, draws up a play to get a shooter open. But as they go to take the court, Jack drags Brandon aside and tells him to screw the play and just take the final shot himself. Brandon goes down and he makes the shot, and Bishop Hayes wins the game and makes it to the playoffs. Later, Jack gets a call from Angela telling him that David is in the hospital. We see them rush into a cancer ward and see the doctor informing David's parents that his cancer has returned. This leads to the realization that their son Michael died as a result of cancer. And seeing David's parents' reaction and grief, it completely triggers Jack, and he slips back into his drinking mode and ends up at the bar where he gets wasted. The next morning, Jack is late to practice and still a little bit drunk, and he blames a power outage going on in his area. Dan, the assistant coach, already aware of Jack's problem, finding beer cans in his office before, tells the head priest, who immediately fires Jack, afraid of Jack being around the kids in this state. Jack storms off and gets his drink back on, completely undoing all the progress he had made prior. On a typical night getting hammered alone, Jack makes a lady friend and drives drunk back to a house, where he promptly crashes into a boat, and the woman tells him to quickly drive around the back and meet her inside. Jack ends up in the wrong house. The people inside call the police and refuse to let Jack leave. Jack tries to make a slick getaway but ends up taking a rough tumble, ending up unconscious on the street. He wakes up in the hospital and his sister Beth insists he get help. So Jack begins to attend therapy. And at therapy, he finally opens up about the death of his son and his struggles. He tears up and he breaks down as he thinks of his son and what his son would think of him if he saw him as he was. He apologizes to his wife for his behavior and she forgives him. At the playoffs, Jack is no longer the coach, but the team dedicates the game to Jack. And Brandon runs out to take the court and sees his father and two brothers in the stands. The final shot of the film is of Jack picking up a basketball and shooting jump shots, symbolic of his journey back from the edge of self-destruction and allowing himself to finally be at peace. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this movie looks like a basketball movie, but it does not feel like it at all. It is a film exploring one man's pain and struggle through addiction and grief. Ben Affleck's character isn't some wise old coach imparting pearls of wisdom on his players who are brought up in a rough neighborhood and basketball is their only means of survival. This movie doesn't really focus on that aspect. In fact, the movie doesn't really explore the players very much at all. Maybe Brandon a little bit and to some extent Marcus, but the rest of the team is basically completely ignored. And that is because this movie is all about Jack Cunningham's struggle and all that hurt and all that pain that he just tries to bury deep within him and suppress it deep down. And Affleck's acting is extremely raw. His character, it's so full of anger, so full of rage, yet at the same time, it's not just yelling and screaming and shouting. It's more contained. The anger is directed towards himself. It's the guilt he feels. And there are key moments of his performance where he's on the verge of tears, or he's on the edge of an emotional eruption. And moments where he's basically shaking because he's bottling everything in and just holding everything in that it's basically trying to burst out of him. And there's some scenes like towards the end when he's talking to the therapist that really hit really hard. And the scenes where he sees David's parents reacting to the news of his diagnosis. And those moments are the ones that really are heartbreaking and that really make this performance quite amazing. The basketball scenes, they're not really engaging or super energetic because it's not focused on the basketball. It's more focusing on Jack's reaction to the basketball game itself. So we don't really see any cool plays or nice moves by the players. It's more seeing how Jack reacts to the scenario in front of him and dealing with that typically in anger. During the filming of this movie, Affleck actually suffered an alcohol relapse after being sober for about a year or so. And O'Connor has actually come out and said that he thought the studio might actually pull the plug on the project. And Jennifer Garner, Affleck's ex-wife, actually called him to tell him that Affleck had checked himself into rehab and to push through with the movie. So really, this film is actually something quite personal to Affleck. And his performance really captures that redemptive arc. From being a place of self-pity and disappointment and anger and trying to pick yourself back up and look past your past failures. Thank you guys for watching this video. Be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. If you've seen The Way Back, let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. Thank you guys again for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.